But this time, these prophets seemed more solid. During these last few nights, we had heard the guns in the distance. My neighbor, the faceless one, said, "Don't let yourself be fooled with illusions. Hitler has made it very clear that he will annihilate all the Jews before the clock strikes 12, before they can hear the last stroke." I burst out, "What does it matter to you? Do we have to regard Hitler as a prophet?" His glazed, faded eyes looked at me. At last he said in a wearied voice, "I've got more faith in Hitler than in anyone else. He's the only one who's kept his promises, all his promises to the Jewish people." At 4 o'clock on the afternoon of the same day, as usual, the bell summoned all the heads of the blocks to go and report. They came back shattered. They could only just open their lips enough to say the word evacuation. The camp was to be emptied, and we were to be sent farther back. Where to? To somewhere right in the depths of Germany? To other camps? There was no shortage of them. When? Tomorrow evening. Perhaps the Russians will arrive first. Perhaps. We knew perfectly well that they would not. Camp had become a hive. People ran about shouting at one another. In all the blocks, preparations for the journey were going on. I had forgotten about my bad foot. A doctor came into the room and announced, "Tomorrow, immediately after nightfall, the camp will set out. Block after block. Patients will stay in the infirmary. They will not be evacuated." This news made us think. Were the SS going to leave hundreds of prisoners to strut about in the hospital blocks, waiting for their liberators? Were they going to let the Jews hear the 12th stroke sound? Obviously not. "All the invalids will be summarily killed," said the faceless one, "and sent to the crematory in a final batch." "The camp is certain to be mined," said another. "The moment the evacuation's over, it'll blow up." As for me, I was not thinking about death, but I did not want to be separated from my father. We had already suffered so much, borne so much together. This was not the time to be separated. I ran outside to look for him. The snow was thick and the windows of the blocks were veiled with frost. One shoe in my hand because it would not go onto my right foot. I ran on, feeling neither pain nor cold. "What shall we do?" My father did not answer. "What shall we do, father?" He was lost in thought. The choice was in our hands. For once, we could decide our fate for ourselves. We could both stay in the hospital, where I could, thanks to my doctor, get him entered as a patient or a nurse. Or else we could follow the others. "Well, what shall we do, father?" He was silent. "Let's be evacuated with the others," I said to him. He did not answer. He looked at my foot. "Do you think you can walk?" "Yes, I think so." "Let's hope that we shan't regret it, Eliezer." I learned after the war the fate of those who had stayed behind in the hospital. They were quite simply liberated by the Russians 2 days after the evacuation. I did not go back to the hospital again. I returned to my block. The wound was open and bleeding. The snow had grown red where I had trodden. The head of the block gave out double rations of bread and margarine for the journey. We could take as many shirts and other clothes as we liked from the store. It was cold. We got into bed. The last night in Buna, yet another last night. The last night at home, the last night in the ghetto, the last night in the train, and now the last night in Buna. How much longer were our lives to be dragged out from one last night to another? I did not sleep at all. Through the frosted panes, bursts of red light could be seen. Cannon shots split the nighttime silence. How close the Russians were. Between them and us, one night, our last night, there was whispering from one bed to another. With luck, the Russians would be here before the evacuation. Hope revived again. Someone shouted, "Try and sleep. Gather your strength for the journey." This reminded me of my mother's last words of advice in the ghetto. But I could not sleep. My foot felt as if it were burning. In the morning, the face of the camp had changed. Prisoners appeared in strange outfits. It was like a masquerade. Everyone had put on several garments, one on top of the other, in order to keep out the cold. Poor mountebanks, whiter than they were tall, more dead than alive. Poor clowns, their ghost like faces emerging from piles of prison clothes. Buffoons. I tried to find a shoe that was too large. In vain, I tore up a blanket and wrapped my wounded foot in it. Then I went wandering through the camp looking for a little more bread and a few potatoes. Some said we were going to be taken to Czechoslovakia. No to Grossrosen. No to Gleiwitz. No to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The snow was still coming down thickly. The time was passing quickly now. Dusk had fallen. The day was disappearing in a monochrome of gray. The head of the block suddenly remembered that he had forgotten to clean out the block. He ordered 4 prisoners to wash the wooden floor. An hour before leaving the camp? Why? For whom? For the liberating army, he cried, so that they'll realize there were men living here and not pigs. Were we men then? The block was clean from top to bottom, washed in every corner. At 6 o'clock, the bell rang. The death knell. The burial. The procession was about to begin its march. Form up, quickly. In a few moments, we were all in rows by blocks. Night had fallen. Everything was in order according to the prearranged plan. The searchlights came on. Hundreds of armed SS men rose up out of the darkness, accompanied by sheepdogs. The snow never ceased. The gates of the camp opened. It seemed that an even darker night was waiting for us on the other side. The first blocks began to march. We waited. We had to wait for the departure of the 56 blocks who came before us. It was very cold. In my pocket, I had 2 pieces of bread. With how much pleasure could I have eaten them? But I was not allowed to, not yet. Our turn was coming. Block 53, Block 55, Block 57, forward march. It snowed relentlessly.